of the Maison Blanche Paint Company. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to show you how to make a believable carved wood pattern on your furniture piece using a product that we call Glaçage. I'm just going to grab some. Here it is. Glaçage is a French word that literally translates to frosting or icing, and when I open it you'll see why. It's got many different uses. You can use it to retexture wood that maybe isn't in the best shape. You can use it through a stencil to create a raised pattern like we're going to do today. It's made out of chalk dust and marble powder and an acrylic resin. It doesn't really have any smell, and you can see how thick and creamy it is. It literally looks like frosting. It comes in a few different colors. This is our natural wood color because we're going to be using it on raw wood today. It also comes in black, oak, cherry, walnut. So you're going to choose the color that matches the furniture piece you're working on. If you're working on a piece of black furniture, you'd want to choose black. If you're working on oak, you'd want to choose oak. All right, the first thing you're going to want to do is prime your piece in the areas that will have the glaçage on it or the stencil on it. You don't have to paint the whole piece, only the areas that you're going to stencil. So in this case, since I want my finished product to be red, I'm going to use our vintage furniture paint in cerise as a primer. I've got some right here. Make sure with our paint that you turn it upside down for a few minutes before you use it. The reason for that is because it's got a lot of chalk in it, and the chalk has to get off of the bottom. Then you're going to shake it up really, really well to intermix that chalk before you use it. This color is such a pretty red. Look at that. And I like to use a Purdy paintbrush when I'm painting. I use a smaller brush for smaller projects and a larger brush for larger projects. So I'm just going to dip in my brush. There's not really a whole lot of technique you need to know. And I'm just going to brush some paint. Remember, I'm using this paint as a primer. I'm just going to cover the area that I'm going to put the Glaçage stencil on. And again, this is acting as a primer for the Glaçage. I've actually got one that's already dry. Right here. Here we go. So the next thing I'm going to do is tell you about stencils. You're going to want to use a nice thick stencil. I recommend a 10 mil stencil. This is the stencil we're going to use today, and it's 10 mil thick, so you can see it's pretty durable, it's pretty thick. Most stencils that you get at the craft store are 5 mil, and you can kind of see this one's in bad shape because once you wash it once, it's so fragile that it just tears and bends. So definitely the thicker the stencil, the better. This is a Maison Blanche stencil here, and I think it's going to look really nice on this piece here. I also like to use a stencil adhesive to make my stencil lay flat without getting any bleed under. I'm going to shake up a little bit of the stencil adhesive, and I'm just going to spray it onto the stencil. And you can't put the stencil right onto your surface as soon as you spray it. It's got to tack up a little bit, about 30 seconds to a minute. I've got no patience, so I usually kind of dab it on my apron to dry it up a little bit. While it's drying, I'm going to tape my edges with some painter's blue tape made by 3M. All right. My stencil's probably tacked up enough by now, so I'm just going to place it on my surface and press a little bit so that it sticks to the surface. Now, there are several different tools that we can use to apply this Glaçage. Remember, we're using the natural wood because our base color of wood is natural wood. Something pliable and flexible. You can use a trowel to apply it if you've got a large surface to do. You can use a piece that you've cut out from a margarine tub. This is a piece of polystyrene. You can use a putty knife from Home Depot. You can use a credit card. This is actually a Starbucks card that my friend Mindy gave me. It's still got money on it, so hopefully it'll clean up nicely after. I'm going to get a little bit of the product on this putty knife, and I'm going to put it on here, and this is what I'm actually going to apply it with through the stencil. I'm going to hold it with 2 fingers like this, kind of loosey-goosey, so I'm not putting too much pressure when I spread it. And when I do spread it, I'm going to hold my card at about a 10 to 20 degree angle. I'm just going to gently spread as though I'm frosting a cake, just like that. You want to do as few passes as possible, because if you pass over it over and over again, it's going to most likely leak underneath your stencil. So the fewer passes, the better. I'm going to go ahead and do it. I've got a little bit of this glaçage on my Starbucks card. And I'm going to start in the middle. I'm just gently smoothing it on. Now, you can see I've got a few lines here, so I'm just going to gently smooth those out. But after this stuff dries, you can easily sand out any imperfections. Now, while it's still wet, you're going to remove your stencil. And look at this nice wood pattern that we've got here. It's the same color as the natural wood. It's a raised pattern. We're going to let this dry, and when it's dry, we're going to paint over it. All right, our glaçage is completely dry now. You should let it dry overnight, but there are several factors that affect how quickly it dries. If it's hot outside, it's going to dry more quickly. If it's cold outside, it's going to take longer to dry. If it's very thick, it's going to take longer to dry. If it's very thin, it'll dry more quickly. You'll notice on this piece that there are some areas that are very thick and some that are very thin. In the areas where it's thicker, you'll notice that there's some slight cracking. That's completely normal, and I like the cracking. It makes it look more authentic to me. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a coat of paint, the same cerise that we used for the base coat, we're going to use again to paint over the entire piece. I've got some painter's points here. You can get these at your local hardware store, Home Depot or Lowe's. And this will save your table from getting paint on it. Again, make sure that your paint is well stirred so that the chalk is up off of the bottom. And I've got my Purdy brush again. Not a lot of technique here. You're basically just painting your entire surface. This paint is so creamy and smooth. It's thick, but it's not a chalky thick. It's a very creamy thick. It's very luxurious. There's almost no smell to it at all because it's very low in VOC, volatile organic compounds. Don't forget your edges. I just love this red color. We're actually going to put 2 coats of paint. After this one dries, we're going to put a second coat, the same way we're doing this first coat. All right, now we're going to let it dry. Okay, I've applied a second coat of paint the same way that I did the first, another coat of cerise. Now we're going to distress our piece. Today we're going to use a sanding block to distress our wood piece. This is a fine grit sanding block, and you'll see that it kind of has some give to it. You can get it at Home Depot or Lowe's or your local hardware store. This is a 3M sanding block, so it holds up really well over multiple uses. I'm going to focus on my edges where natural wear and tear would occur. And I'm holding my sanding block almost flat. If you hold it at an angle, you're going to take off a lot of paint quickly. So it's best to start slow and flat. And as you need to, you can increase the angle to take off more paint. You'll notice that this cerise paint, as I'm sanding it, is turning a little bit pink. That's completely normal. Once we wax it and finish it, you won't be able to tell that at all. Besides focusing on the edges, I'm also going to sand my leaf pattern because I want to expose some of that natural wood color so that it looks like it's carved wood that was part of the original piece. You see how the edges now look like they're natural wood, the same as this natural wood that's exposed over here. As I'm sanding, you're probably noticing that there's not a lot of dust. I'm not in a cloud of dust. There is dust that's coming off, but it's heavy and it just kind of falls to the ground, so you're not really breathing it. I'm going to turn this into a coat hanger. That's why I put the stencil up high. Now I've been using this fine grit sandpaper block, and I'm going to switch now to a medium grit just to take off my paint on the edges a little bit easier. That's always an option. Here's my medium. It's by 3M, and you see it says medium on there. It'll say fine if you're using the fine ones. And I'm going to do some extra work on my edges. I just like a little here and there. I don't want it to be sanded evenly all the way around. Alright, it's very hard for me not to overdo it because I have so much fun sanding that I just want to do it over and over and over again. But I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to use my dust brush to dust off all the excess dust. This is really important to dust it off before you wax, or else your dust will become embedded in the wax. I love the way this looks like just a carved relief with the little hints of natural wood showing through. I'm going to use dark brown wax. Our wax is amazing. You do not have to put clear wax on before you use the dark because the dark does not bite. Our wax comes in dark brown, light brown, amber, and clear. To wax, I'm just going to use a cheap 33-cent chip brush. A little bit goes a long way. I'm just going to scrub it into my surface. The biggest mistake people make with wax is applying too much. You really don't need a lot. You'll notice as I'm applying it that it looks really slick and shiny. If you were to touch it right now, it would feel like you had applied baby oil to the surface. It stays wet a very long time, so you can manipulate it. It's such a pretty color of dark brown. It doesn't look dirty at all. Now you'll notice that you can see all of my brush strokes here. I don't want to leave it like this because if I let the wax harden like this, these brush strokes will stay in here. If you want them to stay, then you can, but I don't. I don't want my method of application to be apparent. So I'm going to take a soft cloth and I'm just going to manipulate the wax to look how I want it to look. I'm not buffing, I'm just moving it around. It stays wet for a very, very long time, so you've got a lot of play. Now after you get the wax the way that you want it, you're going to want to let this sit for 30 minutes to 3 hours. The closer you get to 3 hours, the easier it's going to be to buff. So try to go as long as you can, but minimum of 30 minutes before you buff. I'm just going to set this out and let it dry. I've let the wax tack up, and now I'm ready to buff. I'm going to use a soft cloth, the same kind I was using earlier, and I'm going to form it into a firm pad. And I'm just going to start to buff. The wax is very subtle, but it's a huge impact. Now I'm ready to install the hardware and hang it on my wall for use as a coat hanger. I've got the holes drilled, and now I'm attaching the hardware. All right, the hardware is installed, and now it's ready to use. Thank you for viewing our how-to videos. Check out our other videos and let us know what you think. We'd love it if you would share your own projects on our Maison Blanche Facebook page. I'm Omar, and I hope to see you next time.